Hi everyone, welcome to Beyond the Numbers, the podcast that explores the human side of financial planning. I'm Oliver Wickham, and today we're talking about a topic that I think many expats dream about at some stage in their life, and that's retiring abroad. For some people, that might mean moving somewhere with a lower cost of living, a warmer climate, or simply a different pace of life. Places like Thailand often come up in that conversation. But while the lifestyle picture can be very appealing, the reality is that making a move like that work well takes a lot more planning than people sometimes realise. It's not just about choosing a destination, it's about understanding what kind of life you want, what will it cost, how will you fund it, and what practical issues from housing, healthcare, tax, and long-term flexibility you're going to need. Joining me today is Chris Brooks, partner at St James's Place. Chris has spent many years helping clients through these kind of decisions and also brings a personal perspective to this conversation through his own family's connection with Thailand. Chris, welcome to the podcast. Perhaps you can start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and what your connection to Thailand is.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thank you for having me. I arrived in Hong Kong back in 2007, just in time for the global financial crisis.
Perfect.
Yeah, great timing. And then have been living and working in Asia ever since. I met my wife back in Hong Kong several years ago.
Yeah.
And we took the decision a few years ago to move to Thailand. For them to move to Thailand, and I'm going to commute and work from here.
Okay. So you've spent the last 20 years, effectively 20 years next year by the sound of it, in Hong Kong, building a wealth management practice, specialising in helping expatriates here in Hong Kong plan for their future.
Yeah, that's right. So most people most people with me start their journey in Hong Kong, but then ultimately lots of people move all around the world as that's life. And, life isn't always planned and structured, is it? And so...
Indeed. So on that point, we can probably get straight into it because we're here today to talk about retirement planning. And the big question is about actually retiring abroad. So why is that so appealing, and how often are you having that conversation with clients?
I think it's appealing, especially to expats, although I don't particularly like the term expat. But I think it's appealing because people have done it. They've done it their whole career.
Yeah.
You might have moved from London to Singapore and then moved from Singapore to Hong Kong and then Hong Kong to Shanghai and then to Dubai or maybe somewhere else. And so people are used to moving around. And so it's just the next step, or it's the next move in that journey. So I don't think it's particularly difficult for people to do, especially if you've been doing that your whole life. This is just the final step in that move.
Yeah.
And the world's a much smaller place than it used to be, both physically you can get flights almost anywhere, and digitally as well, so things like, the movement of money and staying connected makes the world smaller. So I think for a lot of it, especially expats, the idea of sort of maybe leaving a busy city like Hong Kong to wind down, slow down a little bit in somewhere like Thailand or the wider Southeast Asia region is appealing.
Right. Look, I can relate to much of that, as I'm sure many of our listeners can, having been fortunate enough to have lived in Dubai, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and now back in Hong Kong for the last 10 years. So again, it's just another city. If you make another move, and I do often hear the question about where to retire whenever you're out with friends having dinner or anything else, and the driver is often things like cost of living. Obviously, we're sat in Hong Kong, but some of those other cities you mentioned, be it Dubai, Singapore, also very high cost of living, which I guess is one of the main drivers that people look elsewhere. But you mentioned earlier on that you positioned your family, so your wife, children are in Thailand. What's your connection? What drove you to make that decision?
Yeah, no, happy to be open as possible about that. So we were looking at moving to Thailand just before COVID. My wife and I had been living in Hong Kong about 17 and 15 years respectively, and we were thinking about it. Then COVID hit, and then we have the COVID years. 3 years of no travel, 3 years of homeschooling. My wife had to shut her private jet catering business overnight. The whole culmination of everything was just a bit much, and so we'd actually thought, well, look, let's just try it, and the worst that could happen is that we don't like it and we could come back.
Yeah.
So we've been doing that now. So they now live there full time, and then I commute between the two.
The one thing COVID taught us is that we can adapt and be nimble, I suppose. Well, one of the questions that always comes to me, and I think COVID changed this a lot. So I had a really good friend, I'm going back 15 or so years, And he had this vision of moving to Thailand, and he actually always really wanted to move to Phuket. And I'm going back to 2011 or 12 now, and he did end up moving to Phuket. And he moved back after 6 months because this vision was shattered, because he realised, the one thing he realised when he got there was he had to keep on making friends constantly, because the people that were there that were hanging out were tourists. It was all tourists. There was nobody living there permanently. Now, my sense is that that's changed a lot in years. But if you can talk to us a little bit about, I guess, holiday destination versus real life, and how can you actually build a life there?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, because you might go on holiday somewhere and love it for a holiday, and that could be, you might be, I don't know, on a deserted island for a weekend, or living in a cabin in the woods on the top of a mountain, and that might be nice for a weekend, and you might think to yourself, oh God, I could see myself doing this forever. But the reality is, if you're living on top of a mountain, it's a bit difficult to pop out and get the milk. You need, I'd say my recommendation would be, if you like somewhere, spend time there. I mean, we most expats, I think, or people who live in Hong Kong, Thailand isn't unfamiliar. I mean, we got married in Samui. We'd probably been to Thailand at least twice a year for the past 15 years. Yeah. So it didn't feel like new territory for us. But of course, then there was the bridge between holidaying somewhere and then actually living there and getting to grips with the practicalities of, one, the move, two, the logistics of that, and then, if you dig down a bit more, how to do it, visas, tax, schooling for the kids, insurances. It was all the nitty-gritty part. So I can see why people potentially like the idea of doing it and then move away again.
It takes some planning by the sound of it. Things don't just happen by themselves, don't they? It's nice to have the vision, but making it to reality is slightly different. If you had to pick some of the good, the bad and the ugly that you've experienced, but also that you've seen clients experience that have perhaps gone and done these things as well. Again, if we focus on Thailand just for a moment, although this is talking about retirement more generally, Thailand comes up so much. What are some of the good reasons why people want to move there and do so successfully? Yeah,
sure. I mean, we live in Phuket, and the things we love about Phuket is the climate, the weather, when it's not rainy season. It's, there's lots of golf courses there. That's good for me. There's sailing, there's Muay Thai, coconut ice creams. Cost of living is lower as well.
Yeah.
Cost of property can be lower depending on where, but I think as a rule of thumb, it's cheaper and a bit more space.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's sort of the good. The bad and the ugly, I guess, is sort of, you want to separate the two. So the bad, I think, would be things like getting used to, and this is the same, I guess, if you move anywhere, but getting used to how things are done in that country. And, it's certainly in my experience, things that, Hong Kong's a very efficient city, and if you ask for something to be done, it's done very quickly, whereas maybe if you ask for something to be done in Thailand, it can take longer than you might expect, for a multitude of reasons. Things are sort of on island time a lot of the time.
Perhaps test your patience.
Yeah, exactly. Understanding the logistics, things like I say, getting a visa. You can't get a visa until you've got a bank account, but you can't get a bank account until you've got a visa. So, that's sort of the problematic logistics of it. And then the ugly, again, I think is probably, I've seen or experienced more from a legal side, in terms of people who've not had good experiences when buying property or rushed in to buy property. For example, you hear stories that people have put a deposit down or paid for a villa, and then the bill just disappeared, never to be found again, and taken the money. I know that's not unique to Thailand. It happens anywhere, but those are the.
So you've got to be careful.
You've got to be careful, and you've got to plan. You've got to do your DD.
If we think about Thailand, but also more broader destinations, what would you say are some of the common mistakes that people make when planning for their retirement?
Yes, so I think most people have a couple of destinations where they may or may not retire. Okay. But the problems and the issues are probably similar. And this is the same whether you're going to retire to Brazil or Australia or the UK or the Philippines or Vietnam. It doesn't really matter. You could fall in love with the holiday, and then, like I say, not the reality of then living that day to day is very different. You're not going to sit on a beach lounger for the rest of your life. You need to have something to do. You need to know who's there, and go out and meet new people and meet friends and be active. And then you need to plan for it financially as well. Different countries have different costs associated with them. How much is medical in one country? What's your base currency going to be, and where you're drawing assets from? Do you have dollar assets, but you're moving it into a different currency? You speak to lots of people who have been retired in Thailand, for example, since the 90s on their UK state pension, but that was when the baht was 50% cheaper than it is now.
Yeah,
and so that same money doesn't go as far as it did, and just being prepared and being prepared for the worst, and then expecting the.
So I think you're getting into some of the detail there that I'm sure our listeners are going to be interested in. And someone like me, mid-40s, been away from the UK a long time. I still don't know which country I want to end up retiring in there. And I could probably give you a short list of those countries, but each one's going to have different costs involved and everything else. What's your advice to somebody like me in terms of what I should be doing to think and plan?
Yeah, well, I think it's bespoke for everyone, isn't it? Like all financial planning, no one size fits all. So everyone's different, and plans can change, right? You might be dead set on retiring to Thailand, and then for whatever reason it might be, you get pulled back to the UK a few years before your retirement. And so having options open, I think, is always key. So having your investments in different pots, in different, with the ability to draw down indifferently, as and when sort of suits your lifestyles is key. One of the big considerations, and not being overly reliant on maybe one pot or one asset.
And I suppose it makes sense to plan for the most expensive one. So in my mind, if I'm thinking I've been in Hong Kong a long time, if I had to pick top three, maybe I'd go Hong Kong, UK, and probably Thailand. Of the three, it probably makes sense to plan for cost of living in Hong Kong, because if I then choose I want to go to Thailand, that's okay, I'm guessing.
Exactly. It's very hard to reverse engineer or do it the other way around. I say, you could plan to retire to Thailand, then for whatever reason, and I've seen this happen before, people who have lived overseas all their life swear they're never going back to the UK or having anything to do with the UK, any association. They'd spent their entire working career trying to create as many breaks as they can. Suddenly parents become older, sicker, and that all gets turned on its head, and they say, actually, I'm going to go back to the UK. And I'd never planned for that. And so you never know what's going to happen. That's the same with anything. You don't know what markets are going to do tomorrow. You don't know how life can throw you a curveball sometimes, but just being prepared for that. And so if you're talking about retirement, probably planning for the most expensive and knowing you're going to be okay, rather than the other way round, planning for the cheapest, and then life throws you a curveball and it's suddenly not okay. And then you kick yourself, because the problem that I see so many times is that people wish they'd started saving or investing for whatever purpose earlier, and especially when you're sort of based in a low tax jurisdiction like Hong Kong. The amount of people you see leave saying, "Oh God, I wish I'd started something sooner before I left."
So when should they start?
Well, the sooner the better is obviously maybe not obviously, but is the answer to that. That's the same for planning for anything.
And when people have competing expenses, they're all really important. The big ones, I guess, if we look at children's education, you've got children's education, university, you've got your retirement, you've got potentially buying properties, homes, etc., etc. What's your advice about putting a plan together when you've got competing costs that you need to save and invest for? Because I think that's quite often why people put off saving for retirement.
Yeah, it is, and I think people often overestimate what a retirement is going to do for them. If you take Hong Kong as an example, 1,500 Hong Kong a month is your mandatory amount that you save to your pension. Your employer generally matches that as a rule of thumb, but that's $3,000 or about 300 quid. Now that's not going to cut it for anything. So people can be overly reliant on their pension and just sort of assume that it's going to be okay. 300 quid a month isn't going to do it for anyone. And so the cost of delay or just reprioritizing other things that people perceive to be important at the time, whereas actually hindsight's the greatest. When because it's hindsight, you can look back at it and go, "Oh, I wish I'd have done that," but often sort of paying that advice forward is the hard piece.
I always find it quite interesting that actually people tend to take a mortgage over the longest possible term, 25 or 30 years, because they know it's a big number that then quite often need to buy a house. But generally, when you look at the amount that mortgage is versus the amount you need to retire, it's probably the retirement one that's bigger. But you end up with a shorter time.
No, you're absolutely right. And if people should be as disciplined about paying themselves, which is effectively what you're doing when you're saving up for the future, as they are about paying off their mortgage.
So just thinking about that, and again, I'm sure people are wondering. I know there'll be lots of fancy calculators out there these days that can tell you, but is there any golden rule of thumb that you use for somebody simplistically that's thinking, well, how much do I actually need to be able to retire?
There are lots of fancy calculators out there, and I'd probably use a combination of some of them, but also make it realistic for what people can realistically afford to save. But often you see, and this is quite common, I think, across the world, lifestyle creep.
Yeah.
So your expenditure tends to go up as you get paid more. Okay. So you might move into a larger apartment. You might start eating out more. You might buy a nicer car.
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Keeping up with the Joneses, lifestyle creep. Do I really need a 2,000 square foot apartment with a balcony because occasionally we like to have friends round, which is costing me $50,000 a month. Whereas, realistically, could we do with a smaller apartment?
Yeah,
and pocket the difference. So that's you see that a lot, and I think it's very hard especially in this world to stay grounded.
It's probably fair to say it's very easy to lift your lifestyle up with those creeps, as you put it there, but very hard to bring it back down again.
Yeah.
So once you creep up, I guess not only are you saving less on the journey, but it also means you need more to maintain that later on. So I think
and ultimately, if you work out how much if you've lived in Hong Kong for 20 years and you work out the average amount that you've spent on rent, it's an eye-watering figure. And if you were to look back at that and go, actually, is that the best use of my capital at the time?
Well, let's talk about that, because bricks, you were brought up, bricks and mortar. Everybody needs to have bricks and mortar. In Hong Kong, it's an interesting housing market. Property's very expensive. Things change. You pay lots of money in rent. You come to retirement. Again, people always talk about property. Do they buy property? Don't they buy property? What are your thoughts around property and that being part of somebody's retirement portfolio?
Yeah, I've got no beef with property at all. I think it's an important asset for people to have, but like all assets, I think it's important to be balanced about how much of it that you own. And when you see things change over the years, it was very popular many years ago that people would build a property portfolio in the UK, and then they would use the income that they generate from that as their pension. Now, there's been lots of changes recently in the UK. So as of next year, you're going to have an extra 2% tax to pay on that. So if you're already an additional taxpayer on your property, that's suddenly going up to 47% from 45%. And if you're not living there, that's an awful lot of tax to be paying for a country that you don't live in.
Yeah.
And so I would argue, is there a better use of that capital that can be more tax efficient? And so again, with most things, it's important not to be too concentrated. It's boring, I know, but boring works. Is to be diversified. Don't have all your eggs in one basket. And that's the same whether you're talking about asset classes or within portfolios, investment themes or stocks.
Yeah. Okay. So make sure that all your retirement assets are effectively diversified. Property might be a good thing. Might not be, depends on the circumstance of the...
It might be a good thing. It's also an illiquid asset, right? If you need to quickly get money out, you can't just sell the downstairs loo, as opposed to a stock where, if you desperately need to sell it, then you can sell it.
Yeah, makes sense. And you mentioned tax a moment ago. Someone once told me that tax is the biggest cost that people will ever pay when looking at investments and everything else. But how much should tax be part of the consideration when you're thinking about where you want to retire?
I think it probably goes back to having as many options open as you can and having as many different investment vehicles utilised as you can that can be used in conjunction with each other. Now, for example, if you're going to retire in Australia, then there are certain vehicles you can set up whilst offshore that means that as an Aussie tax resident, you can draw money out free of capital gains tax.
Yeah.
So if there's the slightest chance that you're probably going to be retiring to Australia, I'd really recommend looking at those more strongly. In the same with the UK. The UK is a much more complicated tax environment than somewhere like Thailand or somewhere in Southeast Asia. And so it can sting you. So you need to take advice, and you need to take advice from someone who's up to date with the changes that are happening. You can't assume that the same thing, the rules that apply now are going to will be the same in 10 or 15 or 20 years' time.
And would your advice be for somebody to find where they want to live due to lifestyle and everything else, and where they really want to be to enjoy their time, themselves, the family, and then research the tax? Or would you actually be looking at it the other way around and working out from a tax perspective?
Well, it depends on the individual, right? Again, there's no one size fits all. Some people are dead set that I am going to retire in, I don't know, Brazil or Australia or Thailand, in which case, okay, if you're dead set on that and you understand everything that's going to be involved, then you can plan accordingly. Whereas perhaps trying to reverse engineer things to say, where can I retire that I'm not going to pay tax, or that I never want to pay tax again, is probably not a sensible way to do things. So it should never be the driver, but you're right. You're absolutely right. It can be what stings you. And you can spend years and years and years trying to shave costs off, or basis, 1 or 2 basis points off the cost of an investment. But whereas actually, if you'd have used that structure, or that vehicle that maybe costs a little bit more, which is saving yourself 45%. That's high, almost half in tax.
You've got to balance it with living life. You only live once, and you need to be somewhere that you want to be, which is why the planning's so important. I always think stories are really powerful. And I shared a story earlier where I had a friend who probably didn't do that thinking, and he had the vision and the dream, and actually when he moved there, he realised that it wasn't the reality that he wanted. Yeah. Have you got any stories of clients that have perhaps planned and done really well, or maybe the other way, that the listeners can relate to? No, I agree. I love storytelling. I think it's a really powerful way to get messages across. There's one particular client, as we're talking about Thailand. There's one particular client. Let's call her Paula for the sake of argument. I started working with her about 15 years ago. She was an investment banker at a European investment bank. She had an amazing shoe collection, but she didn't have much in terms of savings or investments, other than a small UK London apartment that she'd bought when she was working in London. But we've been working together for a good number of years now. 3 years ago, she decided that she wanted to retire early. So she left the bank, she moved to Thailand, she applied for her retirement visa, she bought an apartment, and she's got a very, very healthy investment portfolio, which means that she walks, her dog's on the beach every morning and plays tennis every afternoon. Nice. Very nice. But the point is that it's taken a long time to get there, but once we were working together and understood how we wanted to work and how she wanted to work, it was very easy to show the gains. And then I think that's a really nice story. So if she hadn't met me, her shoe collection would be amazing, but she'd still be working till she. And I guess that's some of the benefit of working with financial planners. You're there to be the coach and just to help people stay on track, visualise what the goal is, and just be somebody's corner person, if you like, to keep them there and hold them accountable to the plan. Yeah, exactly. I've another client who was a very senior investment banker, an American investment bank, who'd done a stint in Australia, but then wanted to, then moved to Hong Kong, but then wanted to move back to Australia. So he owned a property and had some Aussie assets already set up, but we were able to put some advice together and using a structure which will complement his supers and complement everything else he has, meaning that he's going to pay he is going to pay zero capital gains tax on the investments that he's set up. And so he's going to be able to draw his super out tax efficiently, draw this out tax efficiently. And okay, look, it sounds like there's lots of opportunities. People need to decide where they're going to be, but then the value is in the advice, and it's actually coming and taking advice, because whether you're in Australia, Thailand, Europe, wherever it is that somebody wants to be, the opportunities might be different. But if you plan accordingly, it's going to really help. Yeah, the opportunities are different as well. And also, it's probably worthwhile pointing out, for example, places like Thailand, there are lots of different visas for Thailand, and you need to understand which visa you're going to want or need
to live there and how much that visa is going to cost and what's the renewal process for that visa. And that's going to be different from every country.
Yeah. It's a bit trickier than just buying your plane ticket.
You know, it's much more to think about. So, you know, do your research, do your DD, go and spend a considerable amount of time there if you're serious about moving to that place.
Chris, that's really interesting. It's just got me thinking. I'm sure lots of our listeners will be thinking, well, that's all sounds great, but how much money do I actually need to retire? Are there any rules of thumb or tips you can give to people?
There are rules of thumb. The danger that I think a lot of people fall into is that they assume they're going to be spending much, much, much less than they were when they were working. But the reality is you're actually going to have much, much, much more time to spend on things.
Yeah.
An industry average is sort of a rule of thumb of about sort of 60% of your final salary, but it's going to vary from people to people and lifestyle to lifestyle in terms of how much travel you want to do, how much you want to support your wider family, any goals that you might have once you've retired. But always aim higher than you think, and then it's not going to be a nasty shock.
And do you use, somebody mentioned to me the other day, cash flow modelling. Do you use cash flow modelling tools as part of your practice? And could you perhaps tell us a little bit about what the value of that?
I do. I think it's a really nice addition to the arsenal that wealth managers and financial planners have now, along with, you know, the adoption of the use of AI. Investment forecasting or cash flow modelling is a really useful tool, because I can talk to someone about retirement planning and what that might mean. But if it's all conceptual, you're not going to really get that. Whereas if we actually put the figures in and use real life data and then push those out in line with expected returns, in line with inflation, when you would like to stop work, are you able to stop work, how much money you're going to need, it puts it in a very graphical way, which is really easy to understand. And you can then manipulate that data. Oh, well, you know, if I change my risk profile here, does that mean that I can retire early? And you can play with the figures and say, well, actually, yes, it does. It's a really powerful tool, and I recommend anyone who hasn't used it to use it.
Great. So if anybody wants to get in touch to get some help in visualising what their goals are, that's something that you can do with them. And it's interesting as well, because I did look at one the other day, and it really takes your age out, doesn't it? And actually, you mentioned earlier the 100-year life. When you've got that red bar showing that your money's running out and working out how long do you need to live for, it just brings it to life. And you really need to think through your plan and make sure you keep on track with it.
Exactly. There's a few you can use. Well, are some that use the charts like that, others which are stochastic, which sort of represent, you know, thousands and thousands of different economic variable outcomes. But I like to use both.
Chris, thank you. That's a really useful conversation, and I think what today's conversation really shows is that retiring abroad can absolutely be a fantastic next chapter, but it works best when it's planned, not improvised. Places like Thailand, Australia can be hugely appealing, and for good reason, but the real success lies in understanding what kind of life you want, what it's going to cost you, and how to put the right structures in place long before you move there. Perhaps the biggest message is this: retiring abroad is not just about geography. It's about choices, flexibility, and giving yourself the best chance to build the future that you want. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with your friends, colleagues, or family who might also benefit. And if you'd like to explore how St James's Place can support you, please do get in touch. We'd love to help. Thank you for joining us on Beyond the Numbers, putting the human side of financial planning first.